I want to say a few words about the Haftorot that we read in the recent days. On the first day of Sukkot, we read a Haftorah from the end of Prophet Zechariah. He was one of the latest prophets we had. The prophetic period in our history ended about 2,500 years ago, and he was one of the last three prophets, Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi. Haggai mostly prophesied with regards to the building of the second temple, and Zechariah has quite long prophecies. He was one of the longer, what's called minor prophets. Minor meaning the prophecies are relatively short, and they've all put together. We call them Treasar, 12 minor prophets, 12 shorter prophecies, and the two longest ones of those short prophecies are Hosea and Zechariah. They're the two longest ones. Hosea is the first one, and Zechariah is the last one in that group, or one of the last. It's the second to last in that group. Then there's also Malachi, whose prophecies mostly deal with the end of days. So in Zechariah, at the end of the prophets, most of the prophecies have to do with some war that will happen at the end of days, and terrible things that will be happening. It's hard to understand. A lot of these descriptions are deliberately obscure because, of course, these things could happen in various different ways in history, and some of these things don't have to happen if they're bad. All the prophecies of punishment in theory could be avoided if people will be better and will not deserve those punishments. But at any rate, one of the things, for instance, mentioned is women will be raped. I think it's the only prophecy actually that talks about women raped at the end of days. But at any rate, he talks about some kind of war that will happen. And that's what we read on the first day of Sukkot. And of course, he ends with actually at the end of the war, everybody will come to celebrate Sukkot, all the nations. And then on Shabbat, 2 days later, yesterday, we read the Haftorah from Yecheskel, which talks about what's called the War of Gog and Magog. It became a kind of idiomatic phrase, Gog and Magog. Gog is a leader, and Magog apparently is a nation. There is a nation named Magog mentioned in Parshat Noach. It's not exactly clear if it's the same nation, but again, the prophecy is very obscure. There are some very clear prophecies in the Tanakh, but these specific prophecies are very obscure, and apparently they're deliberately obscure. Rashi, in his commentary to Tractate Megillah, when he talks about why these Haftorot were chosen, notice that the Haftorah that is read after every weekly Parsha is not mentioned in the Talmud. And that's why there are so many differences sometimes. Sephardim read one Haftorah, Ashkenazim read a different Haftorah. But with regards to holidays, the Talmud tells us which Haftorah to read. And that's in the end of Masechet Megillah. And Rashi there on, I think, 31st page says that it's the same war. The war that's described by Zechariah and the war that's described by Yecheskel is all the same part of the same larger war. Could be that, and some commentators in fact say that it's two wars, but they're definitely within the same series. There's definitely some relationship between these wars. If it's the same war, apparently the main description of Yecheskel has to do with what will be happening in the enemy's territory, what will be happening to our enemies, while Zechariah is looking at it from the perspective of the Jewish people. But whatever the case may be, like I said, these prophecies are very obscure, but some of the things do, in fact, bring certain allusions to what's happening today. That's why, like I said, that the phrase the war of Gog and Magog became a kind of idiom, like the wars at the end of days, the punishments in the end of days before coming of Mashiach. And for example, the Talmud in Masechet Shabbat says that a person who is careful to eat 3 meals on Shabbat, among other things, will merit to be saved from the troubles of the war of Gog and Magog. And there's statements like that all over the place about this war of Gog and Magog. Could be it's a series of things, and like I said, all these prophecies, they could have come in different ways throughout history, partially or fully, because that's what these types of obscure prophecies are for, and that's why they're obscure in the first place. There's an example of this in the Talmud in Masechet Sanhedrin, where it says that if the Jewish people would deserve, then Mashiach would have been King Hiskiyahu. He was a very righteous king, and he was a candidate to be Mashiach. He was potentially the Mashiach. And who would be Gog and Magog? Then Gog would be the king of Assyria at that time, who in fact lost most of his army trying to capture Jerusalem. Sanherib was his name. So Sanherib, the king of Assyria, would have been the Gog of the time. But the Jewish people didn't deserve, and the Chizkiyahu didn't deserve, and the history went a different way. So my point is that you see that these prophecies could be fulfilled in different ways depending on the circumstances. So what we see today with the current war is, of course, I'm not claiming that Mashiach is coming soon. We don't know when Mashiach is coming. There have been already a lot of predictions throughout history when people thought that maybe now is the time, and then in the end it didn't work out. So it's a bad idea, and the Talmud tells us that actually in Masechet Sanhedrin. It's always a bad idea to promise anything in that regard. But that partially these types of things can be happening in front of our eyes, that I think is true. First of all, notice that some of the nations that will join Gog, the axis of evil, include Paras. That's the first one in the list mentioned, Persia, Iran. Now, the word Rosh, according to some interpretations here, is not head of, but it's also a proper name of a nation. And some say it's Russia. So very interesting, right? The axis of evil. Again, it doesn't tell you about the people of each of these countries. In Iran, the vast majority of people are actually against the current government. I'm talking about what nations and heads of nations will end up. Right? Usually it's the decision of the heads of the nations where they end up in which camp. And the axis that Iran is forming could be potentially inclusive of this type of Gog with Magog scenario, whatever these nations are. Turkey until recently used to be a reasonably good nation, and the head of Turkey used to be not so bad. And of course, in recent years, things deteriorated tremendously. So a lot of things, the exact alliances that will be formed, nobody really knows. But it could be that some of these things are predicted. Especially what I think is a very interesting description. How would Yechezkel in his time, 3,000 years ago, describe it's a little bit less than 3,000 years ago. It's more like 2,600 years ago, let's say. Whatever the case may be, it's long before the bombs were invented. How would he describe a bomb? So he sees some kind of vision. He needs to use the vocabulary that exists. So there is something very interesting in these predictions, what we read yesterday in Haftorot, Avnei al Gabish. Some kind of stones al Gabish. So the commentator is right that they like shine with fire. Very interesting description. I think that makes sense that this is how a person with the vocabulary that existed more than 2,000 years ago would describe the bombs, the bombings. So whatever the case may be, again, I'm not claiming that all the prophecies of Gog and Magog came true already. I'm not claiming that Mashiach is coming, very time soon. We don't know. We have to hope, but it could take a while. But what I am claiming is that a lot of things, there are a lot of allusions in these prophecies of what is happening. And of course, our part, we know what our part always is, and that is you and I, as they say, right? Whoever is listening to me, the vast majority of people, we cannot really do anything on the practical level except maybe giving donations to Hatzalah, to whatever is the need in Israel in particular right now. But besides doing that, and besides our voting rights, which also can help, voting for those candidates who are pro-Israel. But on top of it, the main thing, of course, is prayer and tshuva. This is what is required from every person. If we cannot actually practically go and physically help, those who are in Israel, of course, have more opportunities, but us living in America, I live in America, I give large amounts of donations every month, bli neder, and I calculated that throughout my life, the numbers that we're talking about is a few $100,000. I'm not very rich, but just giving a tenth or a fifth of the income comes out for a family like mine would come out, and most of my donations go to Israel, to various organizations. So I would say that any of us would give throughout our lifetimes maybe $350,000 or $500,000, somewhere around there throughout lifetime for the sake of various good organizations that help people. But besides doing that, like I said, we're not really able to do any practical help. In Israel, there are all kinds of opportunities, but here the main opportunity is prayer and tshuva. Doing as long as we do our part, that will help too. We believe, Orthodox Jews believe, that doing tshuva also helps. Doing good deeds also helps, even if it's not a direct help. It's not an obvious practical help. But what we could do in these types of scenarios, in the situations of Gog and Magog, if it is war of Gog and Magog, or if it's partially a similar scenario, then what we could do, of course, what we should be doing at this time is fulfilling the mitzvot, now is Sukkot. There are all kinds of opportunities, of course, to do mitzvot on Sukkot, both the possibility of picking up the lulav and others, the 4 types of plants, and also sitting in the sukkah as much as possible, and being happy on this holiday, praying, learning Torah, inviting guests on Yom Tov meal would also be a mitzvah. A lot of mitzvot that one could do, and whatever one is adding, whatever one can add to the mitzvot he or she is doing, of course, will ultimately result maybe in the total. Who knows what will tip the scale, as they say. Right? Our sages say that a person should view him or herself as being right in the middle. That a little bit of his or her actions can tip the scale in the whole world. So whatever is happening, if we cannot do much of practical help, of actual helping, of course in Israel a lot of people may find ways to help in practical ways. For instance, if a family has one of the reservists in war, they may help with sitting with the children, helping with other ways for that family that's left without one of the 2 parents who is at war. So there are ways to help in practical ways, but there are ways to help in all kinds of ways, even when you're far away and you can't do any of the above. Just being good and doing mitzvot is also of help, and of course prayer is a great help now. In the last year, practically every Orthodox synagogue had additional prayers, at the end of each prayer Tehillim, psalms are recited for the sake of saving, of course, the hostages. And so these are additional actions that we can do. And always remember, our sages talk about certain things that can help to avoid the punishments of the times of Gog and Magog. One of these is 3 meals on Shabbat. Believe it or not, you think that it's just an enjoyment, the opposite. Why should that help? Right? You're just enjoying yourself by eating 3 meals on Shabbat, but no, it turns out that according to our sages, this can be of additional mitzvah, a great mitzvah to do the right thing before Hashem, to keep Shabbat properly and to eat the 3 meals on Shabbat, and that can actually save you and everybody else probably also. Presumably it's not just saving that specific individual, but it seems from some commentaries that it could be of general help for the Jewish nation. Maybe the Milchemet Gog and Magog will not be as destructive as it could have been. We'll really hope for that, and we'll pray for that. And may we merit to see in our days with our own eyes the shalom, that Hashem will spread shalom, peace upon the nation of Israel, the Jewish people, and on the whole world.